one of the biggest things that inspired Un-Rapunzeling was just feelings of shame that I still feel when I don't get text or understand it, based on the academic arguments and the ways that it's written. A lot of the references that are being made have these connotations and these underlying meanings in what people are saying, and it always felt like there was a problem with me for not getting it. And I think a lot of times the problem is also on the author and on the larger gatekeepers like Red Comp journals in helping authors and the reader understand things by presenting them in different ways, right? I just think of how long form and short form and infographics and all these other ways that we communicate can help people get understand the meanings a little bit better. Another thing that inspired me was just that idea, again related to shame, that after grad school I would have a better grasp on understanding things in our field, and sometimes I just don't feel that way. Another form of shame that you feel is teaching a text and then prepping for it, and then you don't have time to really review it and read the whole thing, and not having that extra opportunity or that text that summarizes it that could have been made, or presents it in a different way that might be easier to use in your classroom or in your research, just a way to get the gist of the meaning. So that's one thing that really inspired it. A couple other things that inspired the work was Un-Rapunzeling. I really just like playing with fairy tales, and I think that's really fun to do. I remember Sherry Turkle, a theorist that I follow a lot and read her work and criticize it. She came up with the Goldilocks effects, the idea of getting things just right. And I just like that idea of pulling that fairy tale and showing how that concept is still kind of relevant today, and you get the gist of it just by hearing about Rapunzel, and it's about getting things just right. Of course, her context was in regards to digital technology and pictures and getting pictures just right, filters and all that kind of thing. And she's referring to just that idea that people are always just manipulating themselves and editing all the time, which she was criticizing. And so I thought, well, what's another way that I could present things? And I thought about Rapunzel. And so that inspired me, because a lot of times I feel like I'm locked in that tower. It feels like an ivory tower that's trapping you in and limiting how you can communicate. And the idea, again, is just that it's a one-to-one, a one way to communicate. The biggest takeaway for Un-Rapunzeling probably has to do with just reinforcing the idea of different access types. Readability for readers who have like a different expertises, knowledge backgrounds, and times in their life as far as being scholars, maybe not as experienced in certain scholarships, to be able to communicate and understand what authors are saying, getting those ideas presented in a number of ways, ways that can be kairotic, depending on the time or place that you're in. Are you just before a class, you need to review it? Are you looking for a more nuanced argument to understand more of the background or the history? Are you having trouble with one of the concepts? Would a visual help you get what the author's trying to say a little bit differently? Another big takeaway of Un-Rapunzeling is the anti-privilege undercurrent in practicing rhetorical equity and performing transtextuality. I think the concept is anti-racist, anti-classist, anti-sexist. It asks, again, the authors and maybe those journals to think more carefully about how they can communicate to a larger audience who may have reader preferences and different ways of accessing texts. It's also an opportunity to show how standard American English, right, is sort of that myth, right, or that idea that that's the only way that you can communicate things. And just like Roshan Ashanti Young did in his CFP a few years ago, where he was code meshing, I think rhetorical equity embraces code meshing and all sorts of communication practices to sort of get rid of that privileged status of a certain type of text, and the text, right, just has to be one way for the text, right? Even if it's like a graphic novel, which is really cool, and that's being done in our field, having that graphic novel aside next to something else that could also communicate in a different way for an audience that's preferring a different form of audience, I think is. I think if I was going to change one thing, I'm not sure about you, Tara, but if I could change one thing about this text, it would be to emphasize more the anti-privilege, anti-racist, anti-classist, anti-sexist, sort of anti-social class prejudice that rhetorical equity really emphasizes. I made it a little bit explicit at the end, but I think most of it is implicit. Again, it has to do with the spacing, and I wanted to establish just what rhetorical equity was and how you could practice it. But I hope other scholars take that up and expand on this idea and just point out other ways that they can be made rhetorically equitable. Beyond just readability or reader preferences, technological access, and circulatory access with regards to social media and getting the word out there as a message. Another change that I'd want to make would have it be more to have more types of rhetorical equity. Now I know that you can't do it all, right? It would be impossible to design like hundreds of texts necessarily for something like this. But I wish I could have done more besides the infographic, this video, and the rap tale. I'm not sure what other things we could have done, but just adding to the whole. I used to binge Broadchurch and The Crown, caught up on all those, but I will not be watching anything like that for a while because this guy right here has learned to appreciate screens and TV, and he laughs and he cries at what's happening to the characters. It's really cool, but what we've done now is we're starting to binge PBS, and the main show is Molly of Denali. Molly of Denali. And I'm pretty nostalgic for it. As you can see, I'm from Alaska. I guess you can't see it, but I'm wearing some representation. And I love watching this show just because of the nostalgia. And, it shows me a lot of the scenery and some of the things that I experienced when I was growing up in Alaska. Also, I really like how the story is taught from the point of view of Molly, who's an Alaska native. And it's really cool that, this voice and this presentation of Alaska that usually isn't heard is being presented, sort of challenging those stereotypes about Alaska.